Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Godspeak. Good to be here with you. I found this guy out on the sidewalk. I thought I'd drag him in so that you guys could say hi.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Just want to let you know is this okay? Got to fix there. I was in Palm Beach. Got in at midnight. So I'm tired and you're all in my room and I don't like it. We had the Student Action Summit with Turning Point, and I didn't want to miss this event, so I went long enough to do the pastors event, and we had at least 200 pastors show up, which was, that's
called the anointing.
Yeah.
When they anoint.
So we had about 200 pastors show up, and it worked out really well. And now, is this working at all? You guys know what you're doing back there? I always praise you every Sunday, but now? All right, good. I did want to come because I had the privilege to meet the young lady you're about to meet, and it was at a Turning Point USA event. I'd heard all about her. My brother swam for the University of Kentucky, and that's because back then the University of Kentucky swim program was terrible, and that's why my brother was able to make the team. No, I love my brother, but I am faster than he is, so I wanted you to know that. But then this young lady comes along and she turns the entire program around. The University of Kentucky was known for basketball. They were known for a little bit of football, but then women's swimming, all of a sudden it becomes a powerhouse. And she's a force to be reckoned with. And as she's getting ready to win the NCAA Division I championship in her event, some knucklehead decides to pretend that he's a woman and wants to compete against the women. Well, she tied him to the 100th of a second. And she is thousandth of a second. I think it went to the 1,000th of a second. And that's like a fingernail. And she just held her own. And now she's become the spokesperson, and she didn't want this. What she wanted was to be an NCAA Division I champion. She's a lovely lady. She's married to a wonderful man, and now she's having to travel the country to defend women because the feminist movement disappeared overnight, and all of a sudden these beta males have taken over women's athletics, and the adults in the room aren't saying anything, and so now we have brave folks like Riley standing up, and her life was threatened right here in California. And so we wanted to take on the topic. And some of you are thinking, you guys are so judgmental. First of all, I don't know how you can come up with that. So we brought a doctor and a psychologist along, and they're going to give you evidence. And you can have your feelings, but this is going to be evidence. And you're going to get a chance to hear from Riley. And so we've got everything covered. And then we wanted a pastor's perspective. And so I figured Pastor Rick would be awesome for that. And I'm going to go take a nap. So should we introduce him, have him come up? You take over.
This is a relay right here. He's handing it off. Well, it is so great to have all of you together because I know that you guys love the Lord, you love our country, you love freedom. And when it comes to this whole trans issue, there's a point in athletics that you're like, for real. I mean, honestly, if somebody is an adult and they want to do their thing, whatever. But if they were competing against my daughter, who had been an elite athlete working towards this her whole life, I would be fit to be tied. I would be in a total rage that a guy would step in and do that. So we understand that people that view us, we have a Christian worldview. I'll be sharing that. And it's really simple, the Christian worldview, right? God made them male and female, period. So it's like really short. Now, people can think or act in however they want to express their sexuality, but within a biblical framework. And the tragedy is that many pastors and churches are embracing this whole movement and championing it, just like the progressive left, or regressive, we should call it, left. But we wanted to have a medical doctor to talk about the physical, right, differences. I don't care if you've been on hormone blockers for 10 years, the physical difference. And then we wanted to have a psychiatrist. So we have had these individuals have become friends of our ministry. They stand up for truth, and I would like you to please give a warm welcome. We're going to start with Dr. Barke, Dr. Jeff Barke. Come on up. Jeff, what a blessing.
That's very sweet of you, especially since my mom, Gloria, is here to witness that.
Dr. Barke has been a primary physician for 25 years. He operates his own clinic down in Orange County, and we're just so thankful that you're here to be able to speak to us. He had a bunch of slides. He reduced it to 10, and he's going to give us some instruction on that. But when we go from the physical, then we also have Dr. McDonald, who is a psychiatrist, and he's also a medical physician. To be a psychiatrist, you have to be both. And he practices down in Los Angeles, focusing primarily on youth or children at this stage of what he's doing, as long as he can stay out of jail. And so please welcome our friend, Dr. McDonald. We can have you sit down here. And while you're standing, because I know that some of you want exercise, but please give a Godspeak welcome to our friend Riley Gaines. All right. Let's get started and have some fun here tonight with our wonderful panel. Just a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning so I don't forget at the end. If you have children in our children's ministry, as soon as the event's over, rather than talking for an hour, will you go get your children and then have them with you, because they're your tax deductions, right? So help our children's ministry out. Also, we have a table for Free Ventura, which is our political action group that's a separate organization. Some volunteers are out there if you want to get involved locally. And then both Dr. McDonald and Dr. Barke have tables with books that they've written out there, really a lot of it surrounding the pandemic and when we went through that incredible crisis. Now, I have interviewed and been with Dr. McDonald, but I had no idea, as I was refreshing myself on the bio, that he's actually graduated from Berkeley.
Believe it or not.
I was a little in awe, right? And here he is with us, even though he graduated from Berkeley. Well, how many of you have seen Riley on the news or something, right? All right. So you're already very familiar with what she's been doing, 12-time All-American at the University of Kentucky. She's been crushing it, first of all, as an athlete, but now she didn't ask for it, but it came knocking on your door. And so we're going to have Riley tell her story, just from beginning to end, how she arrived here. It all started in a little log cabin way back in the day, right? Started about a year ago. Tell us, Riley, all about it.
Absolutely. I'll take you way back. I started swimming when I was the age of 4. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I love it there, but we already have a lot of Californians moving there, so I actually hate it. But started swimming when I was the age of 4. Of course, I graduated when I was 22, so I dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport, which of course it includes your sports-specific training, meaning your time in the water, but also your weightlifting, your diet, your sleep schedule, your physical rehabilitation, not to mention the social sacrifices. You don't get to go to prom with your friends, and you don't get to have sleepovers on Friday night because guess what? You have practice at 6 a.m. on Saturday, no family vacations, none of that. I was extremely fortunate to be pretty heavily recruited, and I'm biased, and I think the SEC is the best conference. So I ultimately chose the University of Kentucky. And as Rob mentioned, it really wasn't a swimming school. We were, bottom of the barrel, pretty much. I made it my mission to do everything I could to help turn it around, and I had an amazing team and we worked really well together, an amazing coach, and we did just that. But my freshman year, really, I was essentially wrecked the entire year. So sore. I don't think I recovered at all. And I thought I worked hard in high school, but really, I had not. This is when we started practicing 6 hours every single day in the water. 3 of those hours were before 8 a.m. So you practice from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. You go to school, go to class, all of the things. You come back, you practice again from 1:30 to 4:30. We ate dinner at old people time, which is 4:45. And we would ate dinner, did our homework, iced our shoulders, went to bed, did it again the next day, every single day. So it was a lot of adjusting. And so I accomplished some pretty good things, but I knew I was capable of more. And so my sophomore year rolls around, and I really started having this breakout season. I'd finally developed this sense of consistency. I think that's what kind of catapulted me to that next level. I was able to come in every day and have a good practice. My sleep schedule, it was consistent. My diet, school, all of this stuff. And so this breakout season, and 3 days before we were supposed to leave for our national championships, which is the meet you work all year for, really all of your life for, 3 days before we were supposed to leave in March of 2020, COVID hits. And so keep in mind, we never got sent home. We got 1 week off in August each year. Other than that, Christmas, summer, Thanksgiving, you were at University of Kentucky. You never got to leave. And so in March, our coaches pulled us out of the water after one practice, said, if you live in the dorms, pack your bags, you have to go home tonight. And I was I was secretly like, oh my gosh, yes, I get to go home. We never get to go home. But that excitement lasted for 24 hours maybe until I really realized what this meant, because there were no pools open and there were no gyms open in Tennessee, even in Tennessee, so I can't imagine here. But fortunately, we have Old Hickory Lake. And so I swam in a wetsuit every single day, miles in this lake, aimlessly, just hoping and praying that I would really continue that breakout season that I was having my sophomore year, when eventually we were able to come back my junior year. And I had this little route. I'd jump in at the boat dock, and I'd swim down by Johnny Cash's house, and then I'd swim back. And I did it every day. And the water's pretty cold in March and May and April in Tennessee. But I knew I had to do this, ultimately. No one forced me. No one held a gun to my head. I knew I had to. And junior year comes. We eventually are able to come back. And I was really glad I did that, because I did continue my breakout season. Ultimately, this was the first year that I was voted team captain. This was the first year that University of Kentucky won a SEC team title. This is when I won my first individual SEC title. This is when I ultimately this year finished 7th in the country, which I was proud of. I was top 8. I was an All-American. I was proud of this, but it was right then and there when I finished 7th my junior year that I made it my goal my senior year to win a national title, which would of course mean becoming the fastest woman in the country in my event. And so senior year rolls around, and I was right on pace to achieve that. About middle of my senior season, so about November of 2021, I was ranked 3rd in the country, behind the girl in second. I knew very well. I was trailing her by merely a few 100ths of a second. She swam for Cal. We grew up swimming against each other because, like in most sports, right, you're top tier athletes, you know of each other, regardless of where you compete. And so I knew this girl very well. But the girl who was ranked 1st, who I had never heard of, it was just that. I had never heard of this person. And it didn't make sense, right? I'm looking up this name, Leah Thomas. This is the first time I became aware of this name on this database called USA Swimming, where it tracks your progression. And so if you looked up the name Riley Gaines, you would see my times from when I was 8 years old and on. And I'm looking up this name, Leah Thomas. There's no record of this person until that year. So I'm like, who is this? There was a lot of red flags, one of which this was a senior. They were from University of Pennsylvania, which doesn't historically produce fast swimmers. Because like most sports, right? Kentucky is historically a basketball school until we started losing to like the St. Peter's Peacocks or something. I don't even know. But no one came from University of Pennsylvania and was a good swimmer. This person was ranked first in the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint, and all of the freestyle events in between until the mile. And so if you think about this, a lot of people, I know a lot of people don't understand swimming, but if you think about this in terms of your Olympic runners, your best 200-meter runner is not your best marathon runner, but that's what we were seeing in this person. Those are two totally different skill sets, but this person happened to possess them both. And it didn't make sense. I was talking to my coaches, my family, my teammates, who is this person? And we didn't know until an article came out. In this article, at a blip of a sentence, as if we were supposed to just skip right over it, it says, Leah Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to switch to the women's team. And I was so shocked when I read this. But really, I did feel a sense of relief because it made sense, right? And so I say I felt relief because I then, on that database I was talking about, I looked up who Will Thomas was because I was curious, is this a lateral movement? Is this someone who went from ranking first to now continuing to rank first? Which is, of course, not what we saw. This was a mediocre man at best, ranking 462nd the year prior when competing against the men. But that's why I say I felt relieved, because I thought the NCAA would see it how I saw it, and how my mom saw it, and how my teammates saw it, and how my coaches saw it, and how anyone with a brain would probably comprehend this. But the NCAA did not see it that way. They saw absolutely nothing wrong with allowing Thomas to compete against the women, which they announced about 3 weeks before that national championships in March of 2022. And so that first day was the 500 freestyle, which is not an event that I do. And so I watched on the side of the pool as, to no one's surprise, Leah swam to a national title. He beat Olympians. He beat American record holders. These are the most impressive. These aren't scrubs. These are the most impressive female swimmers this world has ever seen. And he beat them by body lengths, seconds. And swimming is a sport that's measured down to the 100th of a second. So to be beating every girl in the country by body lengths, that doesn't happen. And so the next day of competition was the day that Thomas and I raced in the 200 freestyle. We both swam in the morning. We both qualified top 8. So we come back that evening and we race. And almost impossibly enough, we went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second. So we tied, which is pretty rare when you're racing for 1 minute and 40 seconds to go the exact same time, not even separated by 1/100th, which shows me that God most certainly had his hand on this. And so we get out of the water, and typically you go behind the awards podium where you're handed this little $5 production dinky trophy, and you're marched out, and you're named an All-American. And so we go behind the awards podium, and the NCAA official handing out the trophies looks at both Thomas and myself. Thomas, who's towering over me at 6'4", me 5'6" on a good day, especially in these heels. And he looks at us and he says, "Great job, but you guys tied. And we only have one trophy, so we're going to give this trophy to Leah." And I was so taken aback by this. I knew we tied. I knew there was only one trophy. They didn't necessarily account for ties. But I asked the question of why. Why are you adamant on giving this trophy to Thomas? Which no one had asked them that question yet for anything. This was the first pushback the NCAA had received, at least directly. And they didn't give him a script of what to say when someone asked why, especially when it pertained to this tie. And so he kind of stumbled and he was, well, we're just doing this in chronological order. And so I said, okay, G comes before T. So what are you being chronological about? And again, he didn't have an answer. And I actually appreciate his honesty, because he looked at me and he said, well, they've made it clear that Leah has to have the trophy when pictures are being taken. We can let you pose with this trophy, but you have to give yours back. Leah takes the trophy home. You go home empty-handed. End of story. And that is when, that's ultimately what thrusted me over the edge, because I knew up until this point that the unfair competition was wrong, and I knew the locker room was wrong, and I knew how we were being silenced was wrong. But when they reduced everything we had worked our entire lives for, 18 years of my life for, down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity and the self-perception of this male at the expense of ours, that's really just when I was no longer willing to lie, because that's what they were asking us to do. They were asking us, when they were asking us to smile and step aside and allow these men onto our podiums, taking our scholarships and our titles and our opportunities, that was asking us to lie. And by making us feel like we were the ones who were wrong when we didn't want to see male genitalia inches away from us where we were undressing, that was asking us to lie. And I couldn't do that anymore. I remember the exact moment when I was standing on that podium holding this trophy I knew I had to give back, which, let me reiterate, I didn't want the trophy, right? I'm a 12-time All-American. I have lots of those at home. It wasn't the tangible object of the trophy that I was upset about. It was the principle behind it. And so in that moment, I cowered for a long time. From November when I found out who Thomas was until March, I didn't say anything. I mean, we talked amongst ourselves. I talked to my coaches who were very much in agreement with me. I talked to my teammates. We all agreed, my parents, But I didn't say anything. And it's because I was waiting for someone else to. I thought surely a coach would do it. I thought surely some parent, some official, someone with political power, someone who was supposed to be protecting us would protect us. But in that moment on that trophy, or on that podium holding that trophy, the one I knew I had to give back, that's when it hit me across the face that if we as women, really we as female athletes, if we weren't willing to stick up for ourselves, it's not right for us to expect someone else to do it. We have to be willing to stick up for ourselves. And so that's why I'm here. That's why I've totally... the trajectory of my life entirely changed. I graduated with my degree in human health sciences and health law, and had every intent upon graduating to go to dental school, where I wanted to become an endodontist. I had taken the DAT, which is the dental admissions test. I scored in the top percentile. I'd already put a deposit down and accepted my seat in dental school. And I trusted God. I kind of took this leap of faith and becoming an advocate for women who are effectively silenced.
You launched because the reporters were trying to get somebody to have a quote at the end of it, the tournament, because they were hoping for something juicy. Yeah. And you gave it to them.
I did. I think we can all agree swimming is not a sport that garners media attention. But this meet was special because there was a lot of media attention, left-leaning, right-leaning, everything in between. And these reporters were desperately reaching out to swimmers. They would find your name on the heat sheet. They would go to your Instagram profile, Twitter, whatever it was, and they would reach out. My inbox was full. And so no one would provide them a quote. Everyone was scared. We had all been instructed, even me at University of Kentucky. Our sports information director demanded that if we got interview requests, we had to forward them her way. And she didn't say why. And so when I was getting all of these requests, I adhered. I was like, okay, maybe they just want to be kept in the loop. And so I sent her the request, and she responded back with, "Thanks, I declined it for you." And I was like, hold on. Yeah. You didn't tell us you were going to decline it. You told us to keep you in the loop. And so I very quickly told her, I didn't ask you to decline it. I can handle that myself. I was just letting you know. And she responded back with, "Remember, you represent University of Kentucky." And those are the tactics, the emotional blackmail that they use to keep us quiet.
In the administration, when you you pushed back on Leah coming into the locker room also, didn't you? I mean, you didn't know that
Yeah.
he was going to be in there.
Yeah, we were not forewarned we would be sharing a locker room. No one told us that we would be undressing next to a 6'4", 22-year-old male who was fully intact and exposing male genitalia until we were undressing next to a 6'4", 22-year-old man who was intact with and exposing male genitalia. I can't even describe the feelings of course it's awkward. First of all, I'll set the scene. A swimming locker room, it's not a place of modesty. These suits that you put on, it takes about 15 minutes to really poke and prod and tuck yourself into these suits. But 15 minutes of which you're fully exposed. But it's also a place of buzzing and chatter and laughter. This is the one meet each year where every team around the country, if you qualify, you get to see your friends. I mean, it's the one time a year, so it's a lot of talking and laughter. And so, and I think we can acknowledge how locker rooms in general aren't comfortable. But growing up a swimmer, you almost become comfortable being vulnerable in that environment because you've always done it. And so I was changing out of my suit into my clothes, and I had my back turned. And again, chatter. All of a sudden, the locker room gets dead silent. I'm like, that's weird. And I turn around, and then I have to look up because this person, again, is towering over everyone. And I see this man taking off his women's swimsuit. Again, if I had to see it, you guys at least have to hear about it. Undressing and exposing male parts inches away from us. And the feelings of belittlement, betrayal, and without even over-exaggerating, it's traumatic, really. And not just because of the experience of in the locker room, but for me, which a lot of girls it is, especially one of Leah Thomas's teammates who was raped in high school in a bathroom setting. She dealt with this every single day, changing in their locker rooms. So in that way, for her, that environment is extremely traumatic. But to me, what was traumatic about it was how easy it was for these people who created these guidelines to totally dismiss our rights to privacy and normalize this and make us, again, feel like we were the ones who were wrong when we felt uncomfortable. And so I immediately left the locker room. And I went up to one of the officials on the pool deck and I said, what are the guidelines that allowed a man in our locker room? You know, I know the guidelines of the competition, but what are the guidelines of allowing a man into our locker room? And so nonchalantly, he says back, oh, well, we actually got around this by making the locker rooms unisex. And so I'm like, okay, one, you know, by admitting you had to change the rules, you're admitting this isn't a woman. You're admitting something is off about this person compared to the rest of us, right? Like you're admitting this is wrong. And two, unisex. So any man could have walked into that locker room, any coach, any official, any parent. To be totally frank, any pervert who wanted to could have, and bare minimum, we weren't even told about it. So that's what the locker room situation looked like. Again, I can't even attest to the innate feelings to cover yourself when someone with male eyes walks in to that changing space. That to me was worse than the competition piece for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So after the quote, how did it launch you? What was the time frame? How long until, I mean, you're on everything, everywhere. Did you try to go home and be normal after graduation? Because it's at the end of the year, right?
Yeah, so that was my last swim meet ever. That capped off my career, which I proudly finished my career as a 12-time All-American, a 5-time SEC champion. I'm actually the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, meaning I have really big, manly shoulders. But 2-time Olympic trial qualifier, SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, SEC Community Service Leader of the Year, a lot of amazing things that I was really proud of. And this meet kind of capped it off. But what I did before I even gave a quote to this lady, is I called my athletic director at University of Kentucky. His name's Mitch Barnhart. He's a phenomenal guy. He's a Christian. We had a great relationship. And so I called him and I just expressed to him, like, look, this is what just happened, and this is how we felt about it. And when I say we, I meant my entire team at the University of Kentucky.
Because you're the captain, right?
Yeah, I was team captain, and I made sure to facilitate these conversations. I made it very clear how I felt, and not a way that was demeaning or hateful. I just wanted everyone to feel like they could voice how they felt, regardless of whatever that looked like. But of my team of 40 girls, there's 40 girls in our team. Imagine the drama when you have 40 girls on your team. And being captain of that's really fun. But of the 40 girls on our team, 38 of them felt the exact same way that I was expressing. And so I called him and I told him, and I said, how do you feel if I take a public stance in acknowledging this is wrong? And I will never forget what he said back. He just said, Riley, I love you. I support you. He said, and this is where it spoke to me. He said, speak your heart and stay true to your convictions, and don't worry about painting this university in a bad light. But I thought nothing of it at the time. I was like, okay, thanks, bye. Hung up. Oh my gosh, he's the only one who's done that, which again is why it's a blessing I ended up at University of Kentucky. But anyways, that I picked this girl from the Daily Wire of the many reporters in my inbox. And this Daily Wire story really took off. And I think for a couple reasons, really. One of which being sports is just something that resonates with everyone. It's really not boring, like the environment or the economy. Everyone loves sports. And I think people got to see the severity of what we were dealing with. I think when you hear the term trans woman, you think of someone who is fully committed to transitioning, has gone through the surgeries, has computable testosterone levels to women. But what we swam against was a man who just grew out his hair. So I think people finally got that picture in their head. And so this Daily Wire interview very quickly turned into Fox, and very quickly turned into CPAC and being pulled on stage with President Trump. Unbeknownst to me, I had no idea he was going to do that, but he did. A lot of really incredible opportunities and doors that were open, none of which I felt equipped for. I still don't feel equipped for. When I had to do my college comms 101 public speaking classes, my face would turn the color of a tomato. But I realized God has kind of blessed me with when you're passionate about something, those nerves go entirely out of the window. So it turned into that, and I, which was great. I was shedding light on the issue, but I began to feel as if I was preaching to the choir, right? Every old man who watches Fox already agrees with me. How could we?
He's also eating at 4:45.
But my dad is one of those, so I'm allowed to say that. But how could I reach the people who don't watch Fox? How could I reach the people who don't agree with me? And that's when I began to, just on my own, reach out to CNN and MSNBC and a lot of the local stations like Kentucky Sports Radio, which you would think Kentucky Sports Radio, who covers all things UK sports, would cover this, and they weren't, so I reached out. A lot of the local stations to Nashville, and every single one responded back with, we don't want to give you a platform to spread your hate. And this Kentucky Sports Radio guy, we had an hour-long conversation on the phone as to why I'm a bigot and as to why he wouldn't cover this story, which blew my mind. It's his job to cover Kentucky sports, and he wouldn't do it. And so this was the first time, I knew media bias existed. I knew it was out there. I knew it was real. But this was the first time it hit me that they want us to be divided. They want the division. They don't want unity. Make no mistake. That's not what gets clicks. That's not what gets likes. They want division. They were actively reporting on these stories, yet I was offering to provide them the perspective of someone who was actually on that pool deck. I was willing to tell them about the tears that I saw from the girls who placed 9th and 17th and missed out on being named an All-American by one place. And I was willing to tell them about the extreme discomfort we all felt in the locker room. And I was willing to tell them about the whispers and the grumbles of anger and frustration on that pool deck from those girls, just like myself, who worked our entire lives to get there. Yet they didn't want to hear it. And so I kind of continued on, becoming a right-wing grifter, it's called. Continued doing Fox. I said yes to every opportunity. a podcast could reach out to me with one viewer, and I was saying yes. I was putting myself in the position where we couldn't continue being ignored. It was great. I felt like I was shedding light, but I got to the point where I felt like I was complaining. I'd said the same thing over and over again, and changes weren't being made. How could I make impact? I wanted to do something where changes would be made. And that's when I started entirely out of my own dime at first, traveling state to state, testifying on behalf of these fairness in women's sports bills being put forward. When I started testifying, I think back in 2020 there were 3 states that had passed some sort of fairness in women's sports bill. Now there are 22 states that have done such. But California is not one of them. So contact your local state reps and your state senators, although they probably won't listen. Alongside that, at the state level, I have been working with lawmakers to introduce a bill called the Women's Bill of Rights. What this is a bill, I can't even believe we have to have a law for this, but it defines the word woman. This past session, it was passed first in Kansas and then in my home state of Tennessee. And there's an executive order. Governor Stitt out in Oklahoma will sign it into effect August 1st. Which I think this is interesting because Tennessee, again, my home state, they were the 36th state to pass voting rights for women. But they're the second state to define what a woman is. And it just shows how this entire movement has been uprooted, flipped on its head. That's at the state level. But at the federal level, Title IX is a federal civil rights law that is supposed to prevent discrimination on the basis of sex. We have an administration in the White House right now, and don't even get me started on the press secretary. I won't even say her name. We have an administration in the White House right now who is actively rewriting Title IX to where it's no longer preventing discrimination on the basis of sex, it's preventing discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And so what this means in a nutshell, because it's a lot broader than just sports, it means that men can join sororities. It means that men can live in dorm rooms with women. It means that men would have full access to bathrooms, changing spaces, locker rooms on campus. It means that men could take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. Actually, in this new rewrite, I would be charged with sexual harassment if I misgender Leah Thomas. Not the man who's parading around our locker room exposing male genitalia. No, that's actually encouraged. That's celebrated. But if I call a spade, then I'm charged with sexual harassment. I'm guilty of a misdemeanor or a felony. I don't know where it falls on that scale, but I'm charged with that. So let that sink in. That's what the people leading this country, that's what they think about girls, and that's what they think about women. That's the message they're sending. It's that we don't matter. It's that our safety doesn't matter, our privacy doesn't matter, our equal opportunities, those don't matter. What matters to them is, by all means, protecting the radical minority, with us being the collateral damage in the process. And so doing everything I can there to uphold Title IX and the benefits of what that is. I'm sure there's a lot of people, again, not to age you guys, I'm making a lot of old jokes here, but I'm sure there's a lot of people, especially women in this room, who saw the benefits of Title IX. Yeah. But now in your same lifetime, you're seeing those benefits being taken away. And so working alongside Representative Stubbe, who introduced this bill on the House side, which passed, but let me tell you, it passed entirely on party lines. Every single Democrat, every single one, all 203, voted in opposition of protecting women and girls. Every single one. On the Senate, I've worked alongside Senator Tuberville of Alabama to introduce this, which it was not as hopeful in the Senate. So doing everything I can there. I've been working alongside governing bodies of sports, whether that's even disc golf. I know nothing about disc golf, but I've involved myself somehow in advocating for women in disc golf. Very involved in the UCI cycling. New guidelines that just came out about how they're not going to allow men to compete in cycling anymore, swimming, track and field, all of the above. The amount of Zoom calls I have been on is ungodly. So lots of work to be done, and I'm appreciating the little steps along the way.
That's such a blessing, man. Well, we're really talking about fairness in competition, where you have to be competing. They have weight classes, in wrestling or boxing when there's going to be physical aggression. We have all of these determining factors. So we want to talk about fairness. And we're getting your perspective as a athlete, especially, that race it was really a time like Esther, for such a time as this, that race, because I asked you last night at our event, do you think we would be sitting here with Riley Gaines if that experience had not have happened, if they let Leah go home with the trophy?
To be honest, and I hate to admit this, right? But no, I don't think that I would be here, to be entirely transparent, because it would have been really easy for me to kind of ride off into the sunset with the life that I had planned. Again, scoring in the top percentile of dental school, accepting my seat, putting the deposit down, which is money you don't get back. Putting the deposit down, I had just married this 6'4" British guy who now has a Southern accent, living in Nashville, and it's really cute. It would have been really easy for me to continue on with the plans I had for myself, but I realized the quickest way to make God laugh in your face is to make plans for yourself. Yep. And so, but yeah, I unfortunately enough, I do think I had to be directly impacted in the way that I was before I felt passionately enough to stand up for it. And that's not to say, again, I knew it was wrong. I knew it was. And I think that's the position that a lot of us were in. We all knew it was wrong, but we weren't willing to alter the course of what we thought we had for our lives to really demand respect and demand safety and privacy and fairness.
Well, I think that's the thing we have to mention. Most of us are peaceful people that just want to go about our lives and not engage, but it's when they come after you or you have some direct encounter that I think people finally, like the moms that stood up when their kids at school, moms said, okay, that's enough, you're coming after our kids. From a Christian worldview, and I know that people's perspective of where we're coming from is a very simple biblical worldview. Genesis 1:27 says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. That's one verse, first chapter in the book of Genesis. And then Jesus reaffirmed that in a conversation in Matthew 19:4. And I love how he asked them the question, have you not read? And none of these people have read exactly what the Lord has to say about it, that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female. You just mentioned UCI, which is the Union Cyclists International, and they backtracked. 2 months ago, they doubled down to have transgender men compete against women. And they just yesterday, on Friday, they said after experts from the scientific, legal, and human rights fields, sporting institutions, were able to present their respective positions, the current state of scientific knowledge. So we're coming from a Christian spiritual worldview, right? But even a third grader can see the logic of this. But they're quoting their scientific knowledge cannot guarantee that any physical advantage would be eliminated after undergoing hormone therapy treatments. It was necessary to take this measure to protect the female class and ensure equal opportunities. Now, this is based in Europe, correct?
Yes, it is.
Which are not known for their conservative ideals.
No, they're not. But notice, even in Europe and a lot of those countries over there, now how they're taking the approach to gender-affirming care, they're saying, hold on, this is life-altering, and it's irreversible. And so they've put a halt on that over there. And as you mentioned, that's not the typical ideas that they embrace. Yeah. But here in the U.S., we've taken the opposite approach. And I do think that's incredibly noteworthy. And I will say this UCI decision, that you said they backtracked. Yeah. They were fully embracing men competing in the women's category. Keep in mind they have an open category, right, for non-binary individuals or whoever, I don't even know to compete in, yet these men were still competing in the women's category. They had a big USA Cycling Championships where a male was competing. His name is Austin Killips. He's taken this year alone over $40,000 away from women in prize money competing in the women's category. And so I figured, I'll go to Knoxville. That's close to my hometown in Nashville. And I'll have a rally, and I'll get a lot of people on the ground, and we'll urge the UCI to do something. And this was just a week ago. And they did something. And so this was the first time a lot of those girls who were cycling, competing against Austin, this was the first time they had been outspoken because they saw that support on the ground for them. And I think that's really powerful. Sometimes you need to see that support to know you're in the majority, because we are in the majority and feeling like this is lunacy. Even the majority, not even just Republicans, the majority of Democrats even, regardless of how you see representatives at the state and federal level voting, even the majority of Democrats know this is crazy. Knowing you're in the majority is powerful. And these girls, they got to see that. And this was the first time they became outspoken, and I couldn't be more grateful for the leadership, I guess, of the UCI now.
That's great. Well, your leadership there in Knoxville, that was key. So we're going to switch gears. So Dr. Jeff Barke is going to share with us, and just in case you're not convinced, like a third grader could be about these differences, Dr. Barke walked through the advantage of muscle density, bone density, or however you want to share. I know you have slides. Take it away.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Pastor Rob and Pastor Rick. It's truly humbling and an honor to be invited back to your home here at Godspeak, especially for a Jew to be invited back here at Godspeak.
Shalom, brother. Shalom. We're glad you're here.
And Riley, what an honor to share the stage with you. I'm just blown away. And for all of you and Free Ventura, thank you for putting on this event. It's truly important that you're all here and we hear Riley's story. Absolutely. So I was having a conversation with God last night. Actually, it wasn't a conversation. I was talking to him. And Rob and Rick insist that he listens, so I got that going for me. And I just wanted to make sure that I had it correct. And we can put some of the slides up if you would, the first slide.
Can you see this here? Yeah.
And I think this really says it all. And so what I asked God about, I said, let me make sure I have this right. Men have a penis and women have a vagina.
It's a bonus hole.
Yeah. There aren't cases where women that for whatever reason want to transition to a man, decide that they're going to compete with men. Of course not. There'd be no competition. And there is an important difference. Next slide. So the bottom line is there's a chromosomal difference, right? Men have XY and women have XX. And no matter what the surgery, no matter what the hormones, no matter what the intervention, you can't change that. I don't care what you look like. I don't care how you dress. At the end of the day, you simply can't change that. Next. And I found my own biblical passages to kind of confirm that from the Old Testament, or we call it the Hebrew Bible. And I'm pretty confident that when Moses was getting the 10 Commandments, Moses asked about the 11th one, and God said, it's so obvious, Moses, you don't actually need that. And that is, men have a penis and women have a vagina. So it was left off, and now I'm having a conversation with God like, maybe you should have put that back in there because look what's going on. Next slide. So no matter the surgery, no matter the hormones, it doesn't change anything. It's just so wrong. It's so obvious that it's almost blows us away. Riley made a comment earlier. I took out my phone to write it down because I thought it was so important. Something like, I didn't speak out right away because I thought somebody else would. I didn't speak out right away because I thought somebody else would. We need to remember that. That is a lesson. That is important. You need to speak out because that somebody else would, that's you, and that's me. We are the ones that need to speak out because many people don't have the courage to speak out like Riley did. So remember that. Next slide. So what are the consequences of hormones? They're not benign. They're not harmless. In my opinion, it should be illegal to provide hormones, especially to a minor, for any gender-affirming care. It should not be legal to do that. Furthermore, it should be illegal and criminal for any surgeon to remove a healthy body part, including a healthy woman's breasts or male genitalia. Now they whitewash the names, right? Oh, you're just going to have top surgery or bottom surgery. Let's call it what it is, and it's mutilation, and it shouldn't be allowed. I mean, imagine this for a moment. Supposedly I had some weird, bizarro mental thing, and I decided it would be super cool to only have one arm. And I went into a surgeon and I said, for my own reasons, I'm an adult, I'm consenting. I'd like you to remove my left arm because I just think it's kind of cool to walk around with only one arm. There's no surgeon in the world that would do that, and they'd be put in jail and they'd lose their medical license if they did that. But yet they're allowed, they're encouraged, it's almost supported for them to do top surgery or bottom surgery, and it should be illegal.
Absolutely.
This I just wanted to show you. It's obvious, but I wanted to put it on paper or in print or what have you. Just average differences between men and women. No matter the hormones, no matter the surgery, this doesn't change. Average height, 5'9". Well, I'm proud to say I'm 5'10". Women, 5'4". You can see the weight, 198 to 160. And I like doing push-ups. I can knock out about 50. Thank you very much. But look at the disadvantage, because this is the way God created us. Different, purposefully different. And no matter what you do, hormonal or otherwise, you're not going to fix that. Next slide. And it's not just what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside. Women's pelvic structure is different for a reason. Can you imagine what that reason might be? No matter what they tell you on CNN, men cannot give birth. And a little secret, men can't breastfeed either.
But they can chest feed.
Yeah. Next slide.
Check that out. There's the picture.
Which one's the woman? I don't know. My God,
She's raising her hand. I'm the woman. Right
I've got
here.
to,
Can
I've got to
see me,
consult
please?
with CNN to figure this out. Next slide.
And I'm actually a pretty strong woman at
Yes,
that.
she is. Yes, she is. And the reality is that 6'1" is a lie. That's Wikipedia. This dude is actually 6'4". He's not 6'1".
Yeah.
And come on, seriously? What the heck is wrong with you people out there that you allow this to occur? Allow it. We allow it. The adults allow it. And we must stand up. Remember, let's not expect somebody else to speak out. We need to be the ones to speak out. Next slide. Hot off the press.
Yeah.
Here we have Miss Universe, and I don't care what they say, this dude's got an XY chromosome and should not be allowed to compete with any women.
Yeah.
I think that's my last slide, and I just want to let you know, Riley, you are a hero, and keep speaking out. And you represent so much more than just yourself. There are women everywhere, not just in this country, but around the world, that are standing up and cheering and thinking to themselves, I didn't speak out, but Riley did.
Just a follow-up question, Dr. Barke. There's two narratives that you hear about when a 11-year-old, a 12-year-old wants to come to the doctor and they're going to put them on hormone blockers, and maybe the parents have some question, is there any side effects? No, they say it's just like pushing pause on their puberty, and if they go off of them, it's just going to take off normally. This is not the medical facts, correct?
No, it's not. There is no pause button you can put on puberty, and in attempting to do so, you can create permanent damage, not to mention the psychological damage that Dr. McDonald will talk about, but the physical damage is real, and it's not temporary, and it can be permanent. It is dangerous. And in my opinion, under no circumstances should that be allowed. It should not be legal. That child should be referred for proper help to a psychiatrist, not to a medical doctor to get hormonal treatment.
If you would not affirm a family, let's say somebody comes into your practice, they want their child to start this. If you say no, is there any political pressure from the medical board? We're going to talk about the psychological aspect in a moment, but about a physical aspect.
There is. I can lose my medical license. So I can have my medical license taken away in the state of California, but not to worry, because Pastor Rob said if that were to happen, he would hire me as a Jew preacher. And we're bringing back that 11th commandment, baby.
So we've talked about the Christian worldview. We've talked about the athlete's perspective, the physical. And Dr. McDonald, I know you're a medical physician as well as a psychiatrist or a mental health professional. And so just take us down the road, because you work with youth, and just share with us what's going on. I mean, they're changing the medical journals to re-identify, instead of gender dysphoria being a condition to get treatment for, it's now going to be described in a different way.
I was on the live podcast just on Thursdays, that was 2 days ago, with Dr. Drew Pinski here in LA, and I spoke about this on his show, and I gave him a summary of what's happening right now in the medical literature and in the psychiatric therapy community. And he's a pretty well-informed guy. He's a physician. He focuses on substance abuse and homelessness on his show. He goes all the way back to the Adam Carolla days of the 80s when I was in high school. Loveline, basically it's like a shock jock show for teenagers who call up and say, hey, I just had sex with my mother's new boyfriend. What do I do about it? Oh my God. But he's knowledgeable, and I gave him the summary, which I'll give to you in a moment, but I just want to let you know, to highlight the lack of awareness and insight, even on the part of people who should know better. His response was, well, I'm just not so sure it's this black and white. I think there are some people in certain cases that do need to get this treatment and this help, because if we deny it to them, and I cut him off, and I said, Drew, you're operating on a couple of flawed premises. And Dr. Barke went over them. The first one is that if you're a boy, you can become a girl, and if you're a girl, you can become a boy, and men and women vice versa. I said, that's not possible, for the reasons that he just described. It's not possible. No matter how much you want to or desire to or feel that you can be or want to be the opposite sex, you will never be that. Never. If you believe that you're a three-armed man, no matter how many arms you get attached to your body, you will never be a three-armed man. So that's not the solution. If you think that you're a one-armed man and you get the arm cut off, yeah, you lose the arm, but you're not still a one-armed man. You're just a two-armed man that lost his arm. If you get your penis cut off, you don't become a woman. As Riley would say, because you don't have a bonus hole.
Yeah.
And Drew didn't get this. He didn't understand this because he's still under the understanding impression and the, I would call compassionate, but foolish compassionate impression that there's this small subset of people who truly have some sort of physical disorder that can be cured with a physical medical procedure. And this is because decades ago, there was a very small percentage, same like the percentage of people who were born with hermaphrodism, which is ambiguous genitalia and an extra chromosome. And that percentage of people was very, very small, and it was almost 100% young boys who knew when they were 4, 5, or 6 years old there was something very wrong with the way that they saw themselves in their body. And as they became teenagers, they became, as we would call it now, gender dysphoric. And they would want to go through first cross-dressing, and then eventually hormone treatments, and then eventually potentially surgery in order to feel more like their body was a woman because that's what they thought they were in their head. But it was a very, very small percentage, and it was always the very same type of person, same development, same genetics, same thought process. There was something physiologically off in the brain with these little boys. Well, now it's completely opposite. Now it's mostly adolescent, meaning slightly older, girls who are now wanting to become boys. And they're wanting to become boys in an exploding pattern throughout the country, like little hotspots of social contagion, as Abigail Schreier described it in her amazing book on this, Irreversible Damage. And these girls never, ever, when they were little girls, thought that they were boys. They just assumed, desired, became infatuated with the idea of becoming boys as they got into the pre- and peri-pubertal stage, where they try to develop an identity. They caught something that was a social virus. So many people today, even Drew Pinski, don't understand this transition. And because they don't understand it, they still think this is a bona fide medical disorder. It is not. And there's two groups of people involved. The first group, which is the group that unfortunately Riley had to contend with, they don't have an actual transgender illness at all. They're simply opportunistic young men who want to take advantage of a movement in order to bully girls and make them feel good about themselves. They're basically narcissists. Lia Thomas is a narcissist. But the other group that is much larger is the group of victimized young girls and young women who have been told and taught and encouraged to try to become the opposite sex, which they will never be able to be. So I wrote an article about, I think it was in December of last year on my Substack. I've got about 280, 300 posts so far. This one garnered, I think it's the number 5 out of 288 posts in terms of viewership. And it was titled Death, the Logical Endpoint of Transgenderism. Now, taking away the Lia Thomases, the opportunists, those people are not really transgender. They're like surfers on the wave. They have nothing to do with the wave. The real victims are these young girls who are, in my practice, coming in larger numbers, saying that they think that they're boys, and are going to UCLA, and pediatricians there are giving them hormone blockers, and they're applying for these surgeries. But they will never, ever, ever become boys. It's not possible. They will simply be victimized. And the end point, and I didn't mean this hyperbolically in my article about death, the end point is actually death. Just 3 days ago, one of the largest longitudinal studies on health endpoints for transitioned transgenders, most of whom are female, trying to become male, showed in Denmark that the suicide rate, attempted and completed, is 10 to 15 times higher than in the general population. That is actual death. And this reinforces the 2 other studies that we have The only ones that are longitudinal and high-powered. The only ones in the world, which are also in Denmark and also in Sweden. And they covered 10, 15 years of data. And they both showed the same thing, which is unfortunately something that Drew Pinski doesn't know about, and he should. And I told him, and I sent him the article, and to his credit, he said, thank you, I wasn't aware of this. Which is that contrary to what you hear in the media and in the news, those people, and I'm including boys and girls here, but it's mostly girls, who are actually treated medically to become the opposite sex, do not have better health outcomes than those who are not treated. In fact, they have a higher rate of attempted suicide, and in the recent Denmark study, a higher rate of completed suicide than those who had absolutely no medical treatment, only went to therapy. So every time you hear that we need to treat these people, we need to treat them because if we don't, they're going to die, it is actually factually untrue, and the research shows that. The end point, the necessary end point of the transgender treatment of children through medical means is actually death. So what is the appropriate treatment for this? Not the Leah Thomases. That appropriate treatment is probably some form of prison. I'm talking about real transgenders. Those who sincerely believe that there's something wrong and are truly mentally ill. Well, it's mental health care. If you had a body dysmorphia, if you thought that your nose was too big, or that you were anorexic and your body was too fat, that you were actually normal weight, would you as a physician say, well, just cut the nose off because you think it's too big, or we'll just starve you because you think that you need to be thinner? No, that would be considered appropriately so, as Dr. Barke said, medical malpractice. Well, my opinion today is much stronger than it was a year or two or even 3 or 4 years ago, which is that this whole issue of transgenderism, the whole big enchilada, is not an issue about consent or minors or liberty or freedom on the part of these people. It's actually more fundamental. The issue is one of morality and truth. That's all it is. All it is in the end. The truth is what Dr. Barke said. Boys are boys, girls are girls, they will never cross over. That's just truth. And then the medical reality of it is that if we don't accept that truth, we are going to wind up harming people, and they could be 5, 10, 50, or 80 years old. I do not believe that this issue is one of, well, once you're 18, you can do whatever you want with your own body. No, you can't, because of the examples I just gave. Doctors cannot harm people who are mentally ill and collude with them in their illness. It doesn't matter if they're 20 or 25. So I think we need to, and this is my call to action, I think we need to expand this debate, not in this room, but I mean in the nation, way beyond simply protecting children. It's not just about that. It's actually protecting the entire population. Because this truly is a death cult and a death march. No different than the pandemic was. And no different than the next one will be, which I believe will be the environmental death march. Yeah. I think that there is a movement that is pro-death in this country, and they are trying to end our lives. Mm-hmm. And they're using the masks, the shots, the transgenders, the environment as their vehicle to do that. So we need to see the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is always seen most clearly by looking at what is true and what is real, and not getting pulled away by our naturally good humanitarian instincts to be compassionate. I'm sure Riley was told many, many times, don't be mean, be compassionate. And of course, she's a compassionate woman. We're all compassionate, but we're being used, our compassion is being used to do bad things because we are not standing up for truth, as she did. And as we all need to do, because truth, even though it may hurt, is always the best form of compassion.
And that's what the Lord tells us, to tell the truth in love. If I really care about somebody, I'm going to be rooted in reality. This is reality. And people that because it's not stopping here, we're going to go on to the furries, right? They're now animals, manifestations. And, I mean, people are going to have a 14-year-old freshman in high school and have a litter box literally in their bedroom. Because once you, as soon as I unplug from reality, then everything is open, right? I mean, if I want to self-identify as, you know, Princess Diane reincarnate, no. Because honestly, you now don't have a framework to talk about issues, because if you're in Never Never Land of fantasy, then all bets are off, right? We're going into delusion. So, Riley, hearing Dr. Barke and Dr. McDonald, you got any follow-up questions or things that it provoked in your mind, what you saw or what you're hearing in all of the dialogue that's been going on around this issue?
I will say, Dr. Barke, your first slide that came up that said, where are the women competing in men's sports? There's something I want to touch on that I think the media has done a terrible job of covering, which is at that national championships where we had Leah Thomas, right, who was a male transitioning to female, competing against the women. At that same meet, we had another trans athlete. But this trans athlete was a female transitioning to male. Swam at University of Yale, named Izzy, now goes by the name of Isaac, had a double mastectomy, swam in a Speedo only as a female, and we were told we had to use he, him pronouns when referring to this person. Again, at the women's national championships. And so imagine, just put yourself in our position of the shock in the finals of the 100 freestyle. So the top 8 swimmers in the country, okay? You have a man who is in a women's swimsuit with a bulge. Next to this man, you have a woman who's swimming in a Speedo with scar marks under her chest, and we were supposed to call him a him. I'm sitting there looking at this, and I'm like, I'm in the Twilight Zone. Like, this is it. Like, God, just come back now and just take us with you, because what is happening? And again, they said nothing about it. They didn't affirm that it was crazy, nothing. They just acted as if we were supposed to be totally not question it. And so I say this because, first of all, Izzy, Isaac, finished top 5 in the country as a woman, right? But if we were really basing this off gender identity, like the Biden administration says, like the IOC says, like the NCAA says we're supposed to do, if we're really basing this off gender identity, then why did we have someone who identified as a male competing with us? And I can answer this. It's because Izzy, now Isaac, would have and actually will never be able to compete at that same level against the men. And now Izzy is competing with the men at Yale as a top 5 finisher in the entire country as a woman, dead last every single time. Every single time. I watched one of her meets this year, and the only male swimmer she beat was a male swimmer with one arm. Whoa. He probably didn't just cut it off because there probably was something that happened there.
Riley, was there ever a sense to simply say, no, we won't get in the pool? We're not going to swim?
Yeah. This is actually something before I raced I inquired about. It was really hard. Again, I knew how we all felt because I saw those tears. And again, the whispers amongst ourselves, we were all kind of grumbling, like, what is going on? And when he would walk by, we'd be like, look, there he is. So I gathered how we all felt. And again, I knew how my team felt. It was really hard to try and convince people, especially at this top level, right? With a lot of this being their last swim meets ever, including myself. We didn't think it was right for us to have to sit out. We didn't want to compromise. We didn't want to make sacrifices. And so But I inquired. I asked one of the officials before the race. I said, what happens if, you blow the whistle to get on the blocks and I don't get on the blocks? He said, well, that's why we have alternates. Someone would gladly take your place if you don't get on the block. And so that's when I made my decision in my head, okay, I'll race the race, but I'm not going to get on the podium. That was going to be my form of protest. And then we freaking tied. And so I'm like, okay, if I don't get on the podium, there's not even an empty spot. So there's no message that's being sent because there's no visible opening. And of course, it was the message, the impact that I was going for. And so then I'm thinking to myself in these brief moments after finishing, do I get on the podium? Do I not? Ultimately, I, of course, decided that it would be beneficial to get on the podium because just like you said in your picture, you could visibly see the differences. You could see how tall he was. If you saw the full picture, you could see how big his feet are. You could see those things. And so I thought maybe they did it to me. They made it about optics. So I'm like, maybe I'll make it about optics. I'll get on the podium, I guess. And I really, for the longest time, I kind of rejected the notion of boycotting. I thought, no, women, we shouldn't have to sacrifice anything. Legislation will fix this. And I was very naive to think that. And it wasn't until I saw it fall with all 203 Democrats voting in opposition of this, and I saw protecting women and girls become partisan, that's when I realized if we waited for legislation, too many girls are going to be hurt in their sport. Too many girls are going to be exploited in a locker room. Too many girls are going to lose out on opportunities in the meantime if we wait for these people who are supposed to be doing the right thing to do the right thing. And that's when I decided boycott is the way we have to move forward. And I'll tell you what, right here in California, at the track and field high school girls state championship, of the 26 girls who qualified, there were 2 boys who took 2 of those spots. And in the past 9 years in California, there have been no shows at that meet. Everyone has shown up to compete, but this past year with those 2 boys competing, there were 2 girls who didn't show up. And maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I choose to believe, and I've tried to get in contact with them, but I can't find their information to do that. But I'm choosing to believe they chose not to be there. You can't look at the past 9 years. Every girl has been there, and this year 2 of them didn't show. I'm believing those girls, and I'm going to say that they boycotted because those 2 boys were competing. And I am now. I think a boycott is effective, but not just for women. I think men need to take a stand here. This conversation surrounding, especially sports, it very quickly gets centered around girls and women, and naturally. And we beg the question of where are the feminists, which is a very valid question because where are the feminists, right? But what about the question of where are the men? Why has this fallen entirely on the shoulders of young girls and women to stand up for this? We need strong men. We need men to fulfill their biblical role, which is to protect and provide. We live in a society where we've deemed masculinity as toxic and bad and this undesirable trait. But there's this saying, and I think about it a lot because it repeats itself, and it's hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. And it's incredibly interesting because you can see this play out throughout history, and I think the last time we had a culture full of strong men was during World War II. But we're now in this part of the process where weak men have created hard times. We can only hope that these hard times garner strong men again, but we need to expedite this process. And so parents, my call to action is to, of course, defend your daughters, but teach your sons masculinity. That's a much more warm welcome I got when I was at San Francisco, right around the corner. Because I know you alluded to it a minute ago, but really I was held. Well, first of all, I delivered a speech very similar to what we talked about today, right? There are two sexes and you can't change your sex. And for saying that, I was assaulted. I was punched by these men who were in the guise of being a woman, dressing as a woman. And ultimately, I was held for ransom for over 3.5 hours, where these protesters, hundreds of them, demanded that if I wanted to make it home to see my family safely again, I had to pay them money. The police who were there, who were barricaded in the room with me, did nothing. They actually told me they couldn't be seen as anything other than an ally to this community. The school, the university, there's been no repercussions. There's been no expulsions, no arrests, none of that. Actually, the university, the day after, and I missed my flight home. I had to spend the night in San Francisco, which is everyone's worst nightmare, but I had to do it. Missed my flight home. I didn't end up getting out of that room until midnight, where ultimately the police essentially fed me to the wolves because all the protesters, they formed a diamond around me, 20 or so police, and we pushed through and we made it outside. And then once we made it outside the building, where there were more protesters, they were like, have fun. No police escort. No one made sure I got anywhere safely. None of that. But the day after this happened, the university, the vice president of student affairs, her name is Dr. Jamila Moore, she sent an email out to their student body. And in this email, I am so proud of our brave students for handling someone as personally abhorrent as Riley Gaines in the manner that they did. There was nowhere where she condemned violence. There was nowhere where they said, we uphold the value of freedom of speech. There was none of that. She applauded their brave students and then continued to go on to say she knows how deeply traumatic someone like me can be on that campus. And here are some counseling resources for all of those affected by Riley Gaines' incitement to violence. And then I'm like, who is this lady? And I look her up on Twitter, and she had me blocked. I'm like, what? So yeah, thank you for the applause.
Well, the UCI, they made a decision. That's good. Some of the states, 22 states, are making decisions to protect women athletes, which they should. But where's this going, doctors, with California is now going to be an asylum state, right? If the laws that are coming down towards families, if a family member does not affirm, if you don't affirm, Dr. McDonald, you really only have one choice, right? You must affirm according to the pressure. Your medical license will be in jeopardy with the laws that are getting more forceful, correct? And how people are going to, if you're a 13-year-old and you want this, you can flee across the state line, which you would think would be some kind of issue, but how can you take refuge as a minor without parental consent? Speak to these issues.
It's really difficult. Mark and I are involved in a lawsuit against the Medical Board of California and the Attorney General of California against that ridiculous law that would allow the medical board to take away physicians' licensing for spreading misinformation and disinformation. And there's a reason why people are leaving California, including doctors. But from my perspective, I'm going to speak out because people expect me to, and I'm going to fight because that's the right thing to do. And if it means going to court, and inviting Riley back to California from Tennessee to act as an expert witness, then we will do so.
The hearing is on Monday, so she might not have to come back. Pasadena, 2 days from now.
Mark and I have a podcast called Informed Dissent, the intersection of healthcare and politics. We've been recording that now for about 1.5 years, and we have more than one viewer, so Riley, we'd love to have you on it.
Yes.
There's 2 laws, one already passed and one is in process of passing in California. One is I would probably describe it best, it would probably be best described as a transgender sanctuary law. We have sanctuary laws for illegal immigrants already, but this is to allow minors to cross state lines into California and get medical, surgical, chemical interventions against or without parental consent from other states. That's already in place in California. Second one, which is in process of passing, probably will because we have a Democrat supermajority and they all vote for these laws, is going to legally redefine the position of a parent. I'm saying a parent, meaning if there's a couple in dispute, the parent who does not affirm his or her child's gender identity as child abuse. The legal redefinition will be child abuse. Well, what does that mean? That means that if there's a custody dispute in a divorce case and the mother decides to groom her daughter to become a boy, to weaponize the case against the husband, she can then say, my husband isn't supporting my daughter's gender transition. Immediately, he will be considered persona non grata. He will lose all legal and physical and economic, all custody rights of his child because a child abuser doesn't have any rights. And that's appropriate for a true child abuser. They won't even have to prove a case. He will be considered automatically a child abuser under the law, just sort of like a child molester becomes, on the watch list and you have to register. That'll basically be what the parent will have to become automatically. That's in process of passing right now. And who's to stop it from then progressing to the next stage? Two parents who are happily married and their daughter comes home and says, I think I'm a boy. And both parents say, no, you're actually not, you're a girl. She complains to the school complains to the state comes in and says, you mom and dad didn't affirm, we're taking your child from you, and that child will now become a custodian of the state. Why would it not stop where it is now? There's no reason for it not to stop. It has to logically progress to that endpoint. So on a legal status, our state is rapidly becoming a state where parents have no more legal rights over their children at all. We already saw it happening with the shots, with the masks, with the closures of the school. That was the dress rehearsal. Now it's moving on to physically removing the child from the home. And as Riley said, I believe one of the reasons why this is happening is because there's been a vacuum of masculinity in this country. Vacuum. And what happens when there's a vacuum? It gets filled with something else. And it's not going to be filled with strength and rationality. It's going to be filled with emotion and hysteria and people and groups and organizations that want to take the opportunity to jump in and take, which is what's happening today.
Did I tell you all I can do 50 push-ups? Riley, you want to have a competition?
Yeah, maybe we can make a free Ventura fundraiser who can do more push-ups.
Any last thoughts?
I guess one more question is there a trend you've noticed in the people transitioning? Because I'll tell you something that I have found to be true. A lot of the people being victimized, as you mentioned, which I think is a very appropriate word for it, are people who have experienced some form of deeply rooted trauma, such as sexual abuse in their past, which I would imagine makes you hate your body and feel as if you don't belong, and maybe that leads to wanting to transition. And I've noticed a ton of autistic young children being preyed on, and ultimately they find their identity in this, and they're kind of consumed by it. So is that something that you all have seen in your practice as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's horrible. There's a female patient in my practice. Actually, my daughter went to high school with her. She transitioned to be a boy. She's up in Berkeley studying women's gender studies or something. And she's now with a partner, a guy who transitioned to a girl. And mom is a patient of mine, and mom feels terrible, obviously. And I said, well, at least she's happy now, right? And she said she's never been more miserable. She's on psychiatric medications and in counseling.
My very first transgendered patient was not last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It was actually 8 years ago. It was a twin, 2 girls. I believe they were around 14 years old at the time. And one of them came out as a lesbian. The other came out as a boy. Both girls were victims of a mother who was committing Munchausen's by proxy, which means that she was making her 2 daughters physically ill in order to gratify her own narcissistic needs. The father, meanwhile, as Riley said, this is premonition of what happened and has been happening in the last few years, was basically AWOL. And I don't mean AWOL like unsupportive dad doing drugs. He was emotionally AWOL, physically AWOL. He was just lying on the couch, just sort of terrified to take action, to control and restrain his abusive wife. He allowed his 2 daughters to be eaten by wolves, essentially. And this was 7 or 8 years ago. And this was the first time this had ever happened to me. And I lost that patient when I told her, when she came to the office one day with short cropped hair and a t-shirt and jeans on, and said, I've just discovered, with this smile on her face I had never seen in 2.5 years of treating her, this joyfulness, this almost manic kind of grin. Not a healthy happiness, like something that wasn't earned, that kind of happy. And she said, I discovered why I've been so unhappy. I said, well, how did you discover this? She said, well, remember that teen therapy group you sent me to? I said, yeah. It was a teen therapy group I never referred to after that, by the way. Run by a young therapist in her 20s with other girls. She learned that she was a boy in her teen therapy group, and that was the reason why she was so unhappy. So she came in and told me this, very excited, hoping that I would say, congratulations, now let's just give you some hormone blockers and get the top surgery. And I looked at her, and very calmly, with as much compassion but also directness as I could, I looked at her in the face and I said to her, I said, no, you are not a boy, you're a girl. And you will never be a boy, but I can certainly help you with the problems that you're struggling with right now by continuing to work in therapy. Her face just fell. She got up, she began crying, she walked out of my office. I never saw her again. That was 7 years ago. Now this is happening every single day. Not in my practice necessarily, but across this United States. Yes. So things are getting much, much worse. And it's happening largely because people are not willing to be honest and truthful about what's going on. And as long as we do that, we're not going to solve this problem.
You touched on it, Dr. McDonald, but I'd like to kind of put a bow on that thought. I was really wondering, from your perspective, what's going on in a man's mind that he thinks it's somehow like the gratification to move and transition, say, Aaliyah Thomas, from 3 years of being 462nd in his categories to, and you just said they're just narcissists that are riding this wave. He's not really struggling with the issue that for lack of better terms, a person that's genuinely struggling with transgender. He's just there for the medals, the trophy.
I think this is an important distinction because, as I said, 20, 30 years ago, most of the transgenders were boy to girl, and they were young boys who, after a number of years of knowing in their mind and being convinced that they were actually girls, finally said, I really think I need to become a girl. But a very small percentage, but it was all boys. Now it's flipped. So is that the same group? No, it's not. We have a new group now, and there's 2 of them. The first group are the predators, and that's the Aaliyah Thomases. That's the group of older men who have discovered that they can't actually succeed as a man. They may have balls, but they don't have any balls. Right? So they're basically taking advantage of a new movement in the country that they can use to bully and abuse women to gratify themselves, either for money, for power, for fame, or for sex. That is a very, very different and absolutely new group of transitioners that we did not have 10 or 15 years ago, certainly not 20. And the other group is the victimized girls. And those are the girls that are prepubertal and peripubertal who are suffering an identity crisis. They are not narcissists. They are not trying to hack the system. Well, how could they? A girl competing against a guy is not going to win, right? So they don't have any way to beat the men. That's not what their goal is. Their goal is to find themselves. That's always been the goal of young girls, to find themselves, but they've done it in healthier ways. Now that path is being co-opted. It's like somebody jumped into the car and said, no, let me drive it. I'll find the path for you. And they're taking them down the wrong path. So I think that we have to make this clear distinction between the two groups, because if we throw them all into the same bucket, I think that we're doing truth a disservice. I never saw this male to female transition group before. This is all new. And the female to male one is also new in a sense because it's a different age group and it's a different type of suffering. But I do think that the girls to males now are primarily victims of some form of abuse. I see that very frequently. And you're right, the autism, the sexual trauma, the physical abuse, that's very common in these girls. In the male side, it's something else entirely. It's really similar to the type of men that go out and commit mass shootings. These are very disturbed individuals, not mentally ill in the traditional sense, but they are predatory. They are often suffering from some form of lack of masculine development. Perhaps they've been rejected by women. And so they're acting out in the only way that they know how, which is an act of violence and passive aggression. That's what I see as the two different groups that are rising today.
And I can tell you in the case of Leah Thomas, and this is all public, what he posts. He's now, keep up if you can, he's dating a boy who's also transitioning to a girl. So they call themselves lesbians, but it's really just two gay men. I know. Yeah, it's like a Babylon Bee headline, but it's real. But it's all public. They post this, both him and his boyfriend-girlfriend thing. And they, first of all, they're openly Satanists. They have snakes. They perform rituals. They're openly communists. Based on the posts they engage in and what Leah Thomas likes on social media, he's come out as an AGP, which just means an autogynephiliac, which just means you're sexually aroused as dressing as a woman. Both Thomas and his boyfriend-girlfriend had the bottom surgery now. They didn't at the time when we were competing, but now they have, entirely paid for by University of Pennsylvania. They also created a GoFundMe where they were demanding, the only money they would take was from cis, white, heterosexual people because they felt as if we owed them money. That was the only money they would accept into their GoFundMe for their gender-affirming care, aka boob jobs, which they both had now as well. But allegedly, again, based off of their social media, they have both had the bottom surgery now, and they have their testicles pickled in a jar at their house, just on the mantle, like, they're sexual deviants, and we were forced to participate in their fetish. Let that sink in. And the NCAA nominated this person as NCAA Woman of the Year, which is an award that I was nominated for. And I was so honored when I received this nomination because it's the highest, most prestigious award for collegiate female athletes. And so when I got this nomination, each university got to choose one person. And so University of Kentucky chose me. And we had the #1 WNBA draft pick, Ryan Howard. We have Abby Steiner, who's breaking world records in track and field. We had a national championship volleyball team, a national championship rifle team, and they chose me. And so I was so humbled by this until the full list of nominees for NCAA Woman of the Year came out, and it was not exclusive to just women. Immediately, the award was devalued and meaningless. But that's when I alluded to earlier that they're celebrating this, that they're encouraging this. That's what I mean. They really are. This man, he is not this brave, courageous woman. He's a perverted cheat, to be totally frank. And I agree with the fact that I totally agree that this is narcissism in the case of Leah Thomas. That's not to say that, right, that's not to say that there aren't people who truly experience gender dysphoria. I have no idea what that's like. But Leah Thomas grew up in Westlake, Texas, which is this community where houses don't come for less than $3 million. He went to an Ivy League school. He's been privileged his entire life, and that's what this was as well. He's never been told no. And that continued. And I want to mention it's more than just sports that are being infringed upon. Sororities. There's a sorority, Kappa Kappa Gamma, at University of Wyoming. And again, I know nothing about sororities. But these girls who live in the sorority house, there's now a man who lives in their sorority house. Bypassed all of the regulations to get into the sorority, such as rushing, and I guess you vote. That didn't happen with this man, Artemis. They just let him into the sorority, and they told the girls, sorry, you have to be inclusive and you have to be kind. And so these girls, this man, again, in the vein of being extremely transparent here, he would walk around their sorority house erect and would get in their showers and do all of this stuff. And so there were girls who have now filed a lawsuit against this man being in their sorority. And so these girls, there's a lot of pieces of this which I probably can't share because of the litigation going on. But one of the girls, and they reached out to me at the beginning of this because they needed someone to talk to, and of course I was there for them. And so one of the girls who was willing to put her name, a lot of the girls weren't willing to put their name on the lawsuit, which their judge ruled out of a fear tactic. He told them, sorry, if you want to sue, I'm not granting you, you have to put your name on the lawsuit, thinking that would scare these girls. But ultimately I talked with them, and I'm like, you have to do this, and they did. But the one girl, her name is Hannah, who was publicly outspoken and one of the ones who, from the beginning, wasn't trying to hide her name. She was driving on campus not that long ago, and Artemis, again, knowing that she had been outspoken, he was driving in the car behind her, and he rear-ended her car in hopes to get her to be quiet. And now she feels so unsafe that she has to transfer from the university entirely. So sororities, prisons. It's happening in Minnesota, New Jersey, Kansas, Ohio, of course, California, right? Where these men who are convicted of heinous things, child pornography, kidnapping, rape, are realizing that all you have to do to get into a women's prison, which sounds awesome to a rapist, right, is say I am a woman. And they're doing that. In just recent weeks, over 1,600 men in California alone applied to be women. And so again, it's not to say that every person is transitioning to take advantage of the system, but how can we not acknowledge how people are taking advantage of the system? And again, with us as women being the collateral damage in the process, because again, outside of just sports, you don't see women going into men's sports. You don't see women going into men's prisons. You don't see women going into men's restrooms. You don't see the language that pertains to men changing. It's only woman. It's only mother. It's now cervix haver, a uterus owner, a birthing person, chest feeder, bleeder, menstruator. We have a bonus hole. Why aren't we seeing those terms that explicitly apply to men, such as their genitalia, or again, the term erection? I don't know if I'm allowed to say that in a church. I feel bad saying that in a church. My dad would kill me. But why isn't that term deemed offensive or non-gender inclusive or whatever that might be? And I think it goes to prove that these men who are dominating, who want to take over what we as women, our rights and our language, they're demanding that we change it. Because it is a power trip, right? It's this big ego boost for them. They get off on being assertive in that way. But these women who are transitioning to men, it just proves the inherent differences psychologically and within our characters as women to be agreeable and to be, I guess, more empathetic and compassionate. And we're not demanding that. Even notice how, in regards to saying enough is enough, really. When Bud Light threatened men, and they put Dylan Mulvaney on that can, men immediately boycotted. And immediately there's like 27, they've lost $27 billion. But when women in our spaces are infringed upon, we let it go on. And again, I think that just shows the distinct differences within our personalities between men and women. And it's just some thought that I've put to it. My wheels have not stopped turning this past year about all of this stuff. So just sharing my perspective. But I am not an expert. That was really kind of you to come back as an expert witness. I am most certainly not that.
You are as an athlete, and to speak to the disparaging playing field of fairness. Well, thank you very much, Riley. Thank you, Dr. Barke. Thank you, Dr. McDonald. Let's stand together. Hey, join me as we close in prayer. Father, thank you for brave people that have courage, that tell the truth in love. Lord, we ask that you would give us wisdom, all of us, that can be a voice, that can make a difference, somehow to push forward the truth, connection to reality, in love, in the sphere of influence that you've given each one of us. Lord, we especially pray, Lord, as we depart, we just pray for Riley, Dr. Barke, Dr. McDonald, that you would continue to have your hand on them, protect them, give them courage and strength, and give them wisdom as they navigate the minefield of the cultural war that's going on in our country. Lord, thank you for your word that gives us the connection to reality and to have a solid foundation to build our lives on. In Jesus' name, and all God's people said, amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. What a blessing.